Previously on Ill-Equipped History. Enter a man named Langsford Warren Hastings. He published a book in 1845 called The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California in Cincinnati. And the book spread like wildfire. He mentioned a shortcut that would later be called Hastings Cutoff. The only problem is that not once in his fucking travels did he ever step foot on that cutoff.
You take what people say, like, at face value, you know? Like, if they say, like, hey, I discovered this pass and it's a great shortcut, why would you not believe that?
And he said pretty much everyone to go to Fort Bridger. He would be waiting for them to guide them to California. Everybody's kind of on their own, but also kind of working together.
Yeah, it's like, we'll try to help you the best we can, but we can't help you at our own detriment.
Hastings Cutoff had added a month to an already 3-week late party. Their options were either to push forward on foot and risk dying of exposure and exhaustion, or go back down the mountain to the lake's edge and camp where the remaining cattle could still graze on what was left, and that would buy them more time. They picked the second option. Welcome to Ill-Equipped History, where two best friends tell you about a story in history.
Because sometimes they're spooky.
And sometimes they're scary.
And sometimes they're sad.
Like this one. No, it's October, so we're getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. The scary stuff.
Yeah. So if you're just now joining us, if this is episode number 1 for you, pause. Hit reverse. Don't pass go. Do not collect $200. Go back to last week's episode and listen to that one first, because you're going to be like, how did these people get in this situation? You're going to want to know that.
Yeah.
So go back.
And come back to us when you're done.
Yeah. And we can all cry together. So
yeah. Woo.
So I guess we're not doing a skit today.
No.
It's not.
Absolutely
it doesn't
not.
feel right. We did a skit last week, but it doesn't feel right today. So I guess, Morgan, in lieu of a skit, in lieu of everything, we kind of listened to a recap of last time. Where are we feeling? What are we at right now?
As far as, like, me personally?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm anxious and
Okay.
like not really looking forward to hearing about what's about to happen to these people.
Yeah.
But it's part of the job.
It is part of the job. Listen, you blindsided me with fucking Vlad the Impaler.
I did. Yeah. And I'm sorry.
The way Sarah called me and she was like, I can't wait to listen to that episode. And I was like, I was so stressed.
It sucks. I mean, the episode itself,
God.
I don't think sucks, but the
it was
subject
great.
matter.
It was great. I was the whole time, if y'all didn't hear me talk through that episode, it's because I was shooketh and I was like,
Yeah. There's some noises that Emileigh made where she's like, oh, just recoiling in horror.
Y'all get to hear all sorts of new noises. I wish I should have documented myself researching this, because I was just like, I would go from just reading a book and then I would just be sobbing. Mm-hmm. Or just mad. And so many emotions, because freaking, again, we'll start off like how we ended last week. Fuck Hastings.
Fuck Hastings.
And his selfish ways. Like, why? Like, I'll give you this. After you realize you made the mistake, you went but be honest and say, no, this is a bad idea. Turn around.
Yeah. I mean, he literally killed people.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to go ahead and say it now. I don't think anything um, repercussions came to him.
Yeah. Sounds
because
right.
No, he just kind of went off, suffered a bunch of business failures, and went to Brazil, wrote the Immigrant's Guide to Brazil, and then died on the way back. So, you know what? But, anywho, so where we left off last time was early November, November 1st, 2nd, in that kind of general vicinity. And the immigrants were really, the Donner Party were really realizing they're in deep shit.
And snow.
And snow. Yeah, shit and snow. And their first plan of action is to find some better shelter other than wagons and tents. So the Breens used the old cabin that they had found, and the cabin didn't have a roof on it. So what they did was they took the canvas from their wagon and they put logs and branches and other things like that, put that kind of roof on top of it, and insulated it as best as they could. So the Breens, Patrick Dolan, and Antonio stayed in that cabin, and it was only 168 square feet.
Wow.
So that was a family of like 9, so like 11 people were living in that cabin. And people shifted a little bit, but this is how it started out. Louis Keseberg made himself a lean-to out of pine branches against the side of the Breens' cabin, where him, his wife, and his 2 kids, plus Augustus Spencer and Charles Berger, stayed. So basically just like a lean-to against the cabin.
Made out of pine branches.
Yeah, if you don't know what a lean-to is, guys, that's just Google it. It's not very good.
It's
and they had
not an adequate
children.
Shelter, especially not for 7 people.
Nope. So William Eddy and William Foster found a boulder the height of a cabin. That is a picture of that boulder is in that link if you would like to look at it. Guys, I will post a link to the site where there are a lot of pictures of what this place looks like now. So we can kind of be in the vibe. So, and they built a cabin up against it. It was 18 by 25 feet, very crudely built, but all 6 Murphys, all 3 Fosters, all 3 Pikes, and all 4 Eddies lived in this 450 square foot cabin.
That's a big cabin that they built.
It is a big cabin. And what they probably did was just fell a bunch of trees and then just notched them and stacked them up so they were able to get that cabin. And the good thing about the boulder was that they could build a fire up against it, and there was a natural like draft for the fire to go and the smoke to go out, but the heat to stay in. The Graves built their cabin nearly half a mile to the east and slightly north of the Breens. They were kind of loners, so they didn't want to be too close to the rest of the families. So they cut trees, used their oxen chains to drag, all the stuff. Built a 2-roomed cabin, pretty much the same on each side, about 8 feet tall. Each had its own working fireplace. When the Murphys finished with their cabin, they went and helped the Graves as well. So one side was for the Graves plus Amanda McCutcheon and her baby. And then the other side was for Margaret, all of those children. So that's 4 kids, Margaret, their 5 dogs, and then Charles Stanton, John Denton, and Milt Elliott squeezed in with the Reeds. Louis and Salvador kind of hopped around here and there, but stayed with the Graves and the Reeds as well. So they built a pretty good sized cabin too, probably about the same size as the Eddies. When the cabins were done, they unpacked the wagons and set up the cabins, made beds out of pine boughs, and went out and decided which animals to kill.
Yeah.
So they needed the oxen to pull the wagons, but if the weather made a turn for the better, but the oxen also needed something to eat, and it was really not a whole lot, just like pine branches for them to eat at this point. So they couldn't kill too many, but they also had to keep, they had to keep some alive. But if the weather turned warm, there was no way to preserve the meat.
Right.
Because they just had to stick it in the snow to eat. And I think they killed off a little, even if they killed all the animals at this time, they only had enough now to feed them for a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
The lot of them. So
I mean, there's still 80 people.
Yeah. Yeah, there's still a lot of people. So another problem was all of the animals that were left were inadequately divided. So the Breens, like I said, still had a lot of their cattle, and the Eddies had nothing. So there needed to be a way to like redistribute to make it a little more fair.
Right.
And the Reeds asked to buy some of Graves' oxen. They came to an agreement that Miss Reed could have 2 of the live oxen, but once they got to California, the Reeds would have to give him 4 oxen.
Okay.
So, and then the Breens sold her 2 more. And the Eddies purchased an ox that had already starved to death from the Graves for $25.
Wow.
That's a lot of money.
It's probably the equivalent of a couple $100.
About $1,035. Over
Wow.
$1,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So over the next several days, they ended up killing most of the oxen, prepared the meat, and everything got buried in the snow for refrigeration, and everything they couldn't eat got fed to the dogs. So, bones and stuff.
Yeah.
They're kind of battening down the hatches. They're getting ready for, if they have to stay, what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
Notice I didn't say anything about the Donners because they were still at Adler's Creek. And they never got a permanent shelter in place. They stayed in tents the entire time.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Because the Donner fathers, George and Jacob, were elderly. George now had this giant infected cut on his right hand. Jacob was just already pretty much bedridden by the time they got even there. And then most of their children were like 9 and under. There were only 4 kids that were above the 12 and above.
Yeah.
So that left a lot of the work to like Noah James, Samuel Shoemaker, and John Denton, who were their teamsters. So by November the 12th, the snow finally stopped. And they were like, we got to get out of here. So this next attempt would include women who didn't have kids, since the last time the kids weighed them down. And the plan was to get over the mountain, get help, come back. This did not include any of the Donners. I don't even know if they knew that there was going to be an attempt because
they're so far away.
Yeah. So the company that attempted to cross this time was Franklin Graves, Mary Ann Graves, Jay and Sarah Fosdick, William Eddy, William Foster, and a few of the Donners' teamsters. 2 of the Reed's teamsters, Charles Stanton, and then Louis and Salvador. They still had 7 mules that Sutter had sent from them the first time.
Mm-hmm.
That night, they came back to the camp after encountering 10 feet of snow on the other end of the lake. And that's hard work getting through at sea level, let alone the 6,000 feet of elevation that they were at.
Yeah.
I remember when we bought our truck in Colorado and we took that 1/4 mile hike, and it was a beautiful day in the 70s, and we were struggling on that 1/4 mile because we just, and yeah, their bodies had become used to the elevation because they'd been there forever. But still.
They didn't grow up in that elevation.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. So, the next day, William Eddy borrowed a gun and went hunting. He was able to bring home an owl and a coyote and a few squirrels over the next few days. So, November 14th, William Eddy went out hunting again, and he came across a grizzly bear. This is the most terrifying thing. He shot at it once, and because gun technology was not the best back then, it just irritated the bear.
Yeah.
And the bear came charging at him. But he was an experienced hunter, and he always kept an extra bullet. I think they called it a ball. I don't know what kind of gun it was, y'all. Just roll with it. He kept an extra bullet in his mouth. So he was able to quickly spit it out, reload the gun, and he hid behind the tree. And when the bear came around the tree, he put the barrel up to his chest and fired point blank.
Wow.
And then he grabbed a stick and beat the bear in the head until he knew it was dead.
Oh my God.
Which, I'm so impressed.
That
I would have panicked and died.
Believe he not only survived an encounter with a pissed off grizzly bear, but managed to kill it by himself.
Yeah.
That's...
After he pissed it off. Like, it wasn't a sneak attack.
No, that is extremely impressive.
That man has nerves of steel.
How on earth did he get a grizzly? Like, did he try to get it back to camp, or?
Well, he actually ended up going back to camp, and that's where Franklin Graves went back with him, and the two of them ended up dragging it into camp. And the Eddy shared the bear with the Fosters, Graves, and the Reeds, but the meat was gone within just a few days.
Yeah.
Because you're feeding, like, that's over 20 people you're feeding right there.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Graves alone was 13.
Yeah,
so,
and it's too cold and damp to, like, because I'm thinking of, like, using every part, and, like, the hide of the bear, like, you can't really tan the leather when it's so, like, cold and snowy and probably damp, so, like, that fur isn't really going to be very useful.
No. Nope. So it hadn't snowed in a week, and there were bare patches beginning to appear on the ground by November 21st. And at this time, all the men, women, and older children would go. And the mentality was the more people that they took with them, that's the less people at the camp, that's the longer the rations would last.
Yeah.
So the snow had a crust on it from like the sunny days and the cold nights. And they made it over the pass the first day and camped at the summit that night. By November 22nd, the next morning, the snow was a bit deeper and the sun softened the surface a bit, and the people could still walk. The mules were too heavy, and they broke through the snow. William Eddy suggested that they abandon the mules and continue on foot, but Stanton had promised Sutter that he would return the mules, and he was getting really obsessed with this promise. Like, they said it was weirdly obsessed about making sure these mules make it back. Eddy even offered to pay for the mules himself if need be, but he wouldn't give in. They were like, fine, we'll take the other 2 guides and we'll go. At this point, it seemed if they went on foot, it was going to be passable. But Eddie intercepted the two cowboys, the Miwok cowboys, and said that if we don't get these mules back to Sutton, he'd probably hang the two Miwoks. And yeah, put that in their heads. So instead of continuing on foot, they all went back to the camp. This is probably one of many heartbreaking moments that when you look back, it just hurts to know that, yeah, some of them might have gotten some exposure and stuff, but it hurts. Yeah. November 26th, it started to snow again and continued for a week, leaving 6 to 7 feet of fresh snow on the ground. In this snowstorm, all of the mules that Stanton was so ready to save wandered off into the snowstorm and died. And they were unable to find them. Also, all the cattle walked off in the snowstorm and died. Because these are like blizzard conditions.
Yeah.
They tried fishing in the lake, but they couldn't catch anything. They didn't have any bait. So during this week of snow, it was so deep, the snow was so deep, that the doors of the cabins were like getting buried in snow. So they had to like cut steps into the snow to get out of the front doors of these cabins. It was like cold, and all they had was very lean meat left, because by the time the oxen and the cattle even got up there, they don't have any meat on their bones either.
Right.
They're struggling. So basically they were just eating like muscle and gristle at this point. And they like had small children.
Yeah.
Through this. Like how? And eventually they had to start cutting live trees to burn, because all of the dry logs and limbs and stuff were now wet at the bottom of, 10 feet of snow. So, unfortunately, if you were a employee, you were kind of living off of what your employer could give you. And it was always less than what they were giving themselves.
Or their families, I'm sure.
For their families. So the beginning stages of starvation were kind of starting to like rear their ugly heads. No one had died from starvation yet. But it was starting to become apparent that it was a very big problem. I mean, the Murphy cabin alone had 17 mouths to feed. And with Eddie going out every day to hunt, he might have brought back a squirrel every day, because all of the animals had gone down to the valley at the bottom.
Hunkered down for the winter. Yeah.
Yeah. For the life of me, I don't know why they didn't just give up and try to backtrack back into the valley. I don't know if like by the time they realized that that's probably what they should do, that it was too late and they were too weak.
That's probably it.
Or
like maybe the conditions were so bad, like and they killed all the oxen and cows and stuff. So
yeah,
they're like, I guess we're stuck here.
Yeah. In the Breen cabin, Patrick was suffering from kidney stones. So insult to injury. Yeah. And they ended up killing the last of the oxen on November 29th. Now remember, the Breen family had the most oxen.
Right.
So this only lasted them to the end of November. And the Donners had it even worse, because remember, they had no cattle left. They didn't even have a cabin. George Donner's hand was it was so badly infected that his hand was swollen to twice normal size. Like when he went out to get firewood, he would have to like lay it on the crook of his arm and just use the crook of his arm. And Jacob Donner was even weaker, and the wives had to do all the work. And they had like 1 million kids between the two of them.
Yeah.
So the single men at Adler Camp had it the worst, though. So we're talking like Samuel Shoemaker, that those single men, because they had absolutely no resources. The Donners didn't have anything to give them, and they were having to live off of the land. They didn't have a shelter. They were living under bushes, basically, and they were catching mice and cooking the mice and then eating them whole, and literally eating strips of their buffalo robes just to try to survive. And there was, like, in the book, a whole, like, breakdown on, like, how many calories you should intake just to maintain your weight. And I did my math. So for me to maintain, I needed to eat about 1,600 calories a day just to do whatever I was doing.
Yeah, and it's probably not including, like, calories you're expending to, like forage and hunt and just try to survive. That's literally, like, if you're just sitting there, you need at least 1,600 calories to maintain your body weight.
Right. I think they said, like, a pound of like, beef jerky, which is comparable to kind of what they were eating, is only, like, 1,000 to 2,000 calories. And they were having to make that last for weeks.
Yeah, with multiple mouths to feed.
Yeah. So it's looking rough.
Yeah.
Let's pause from the cabins, from the lake, and let's go back to James Reed. So he had made it to California. He somehow, I don't know, honestly, what the fuck he was doing 100%. He joined the army briefly while they were stuck in the mountains. And I want you to remember, the last he knew that of his family was back at, like, Truckee or Humboldt back in October. Like, they were fine. So he was like, I'm going to, like, come over to California, and while I wait for my family to come to me, I'm going to, like, I guess, get status and money. And he had land set up and stuff like that. And I think then he heard from, I guess, Stanton and McCutcheon that they were running low on supplies. So he was like, oh shit, maybe I do need to go help them because they're not here yet. So he was in the works of, like, doing things. But they were really hoping that they were wintering in the Truckee Meadows, where they would have plenty of game to hunt. That's what they were hoping for. But he was the last one to know, other than, he really was the last one to know, because Stanton and McCutcheon ran into him on the trail as he was going out. They were coming back in. So everyone was just kind of hoping they were wintering in the Truckee Meadows, but they weren't. And so it was imperative to get news out to get help for them, because nobody knew. And so the Graves, being, you know, outdoorsy people, got started on making snowshoes for everyone. And by December 15th, they had 15 pairs of snowshoes. And they decided that Stanton and the Miwoks would be the ones to take them back over the mountains. And then, because they were the ones that had gone back and they'd been through the way before. Yeah. And then they would go get help and bring more back. So now we're on to December 16th and the formation of what they call the Forlorn Hope Group.
Wow, that is so bleak.
It's because it is. So on December 16th, they decided only the strongest would go. And this included, in a couple of situations, and mothers had to leave their babies behind. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Amanda and Harriet would both leave their children. So in this group, we've got Mary Ann Graves, Sarah Fosdick, Sarah Foster, Amanda McCutcheon, and Harriet Pike. As for the men, we've got Franklin Graves, Jay Fosdick, William Eddy, Charles Stanton, Salvador Lewis, and William Foster. And then a 12-year-old boy, Lemuel Murphy.
Okay.
They were on their way to Johnson's ranch. So imagine this ranch is at like the base of the mountains on the other side, and it's along the immigrant road. So they were just trying to get to this ranch to tell people, get as much supplies as possible, regroup, and go back. They estimated that it would be 30 to 40 miles to their southeast. In reality, it was closer to 75 miles.
Oh my God.
But time was of the essence, because that morning, Bayless Williams, one of the Reed family's employees, had died of starvation.
Oh, man.
So we're seeing our first one on December the 16th. And now that's down to 80-ish, not including James Reed or William McCutcheon. Literally in this book, this is one of the points where I was sobbing, because like they're saying goodbye to their families and they don't know if their families are going to survive. They don't know if they're going to survive. They don't know if they'll ever see these children again, their wives, their husbands again. I mean, they have no idea.
The group of forlorn hope, for sure.
Yeah. It's well fitted. So we've got two big things that would inevitably plague this group: snow blindness and hypothermia.
Mm-hmm.
So they went up the pass, and the effects of snow blindness were really, really catching up with them. And if y'all don't know the extent of snow blindness, imagine a sunburn for your eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you will go blind temporarily because of how bright the snow is. And by late afternoon, they had already reached the part of the pass where the mules had been bogged down back in November. So that was promising. They had packed enough meat for a 6-day journey. On the second day, they reached the summit, but didn't go but a few miles past the previous night's camp. So they were slow going, but they're going. By December 18th, they went through deep powder in the valley and then started going up the giant granite peaks. Charles Stanton, their one reliable guy that had been through the pass going in that direction, was starting to lag behind because of snow blindness. And they set up camp that night, and it would take him another hour to reach them.
Oh, wow.
So this was a huge problem, because even the two Miwok cowboys were like, we don't know exactly where we're at. Plus, there's snow everywhere. It's not like you can see the tracks. They're gone.
Yeah.
And that night on the 18th, it began to snow again around 11 o'clock that night. The next morning, on the 19th, it was still snowing. They were on their 4th day of what they thought was a 6-day journey, and they had only gone 14 miles.
Oh my God.
And they only had 2 more days of beef left. That afternoon, they made camp, and it was another 2 hours before Stanton stumbled into camp. On December 20th, they'd got up like they always had. So I believe this is day 5, 6, something like that. Mary Ann and Sarah had stayed behind to help Sarah fix a snowshoe. Sarah got up and went on to go catch up with her husband. And Mary Ann started walking away, but she saw Stanton sitting, leaning against a tree, smoking his pipe. And she was like, "Hey, you coming?" And he was like, yeah, I'll come. But she said that he looked up and it was almost like he wasn't looking at her. So it was like he probably just couldn't see shit anymore.
Mm-hmm.
She walked off. And his bones were found 5 months later by another party.
Oh my God.
He just died leaning against the tree.
Oh my God.
So they continued, kept looking for him behind their backs, and he would never show up again.
Oh my God.
So now they were without a good guide. And the men started to fare worse than the women. And it was a really weird thing that, like, up until this point, I don't know if you've noticed, only men have died.
Yeah.
Except for, you know, the Reed family's mother back in, like, May. But, like, up until this point, only men have died. And they said, they actually went into, like, a whole lot of science into the book, but it was basically, like, women have a lower, typically core body temperature anyway, so it's less shocking when you get that cold because we're already kind of cold anyway.
Yeah.
It's less body heat loss.
And usually women store, like, more fat on their bodies as well.
Yeah, they mentioned that. And it's typically not internal. It's more like on the outer layer.
Yeah.
So it just kind of insulated them a little better. Plus, women need less calories. And in this situation, women are typically doing less of the manual labor. So they're not exerting as much.
Right.
So at this point, Jay was kind of beginning to, like, slow a little bit, but nothing too crazy. So let's take a pause on the forlorn group. Let's look back and see what we've got at camp. The mothers were running really low. The Graves family still had some beef left in the snow, but some of the other families had already run out. And they were beginning to just boil strips of hide from the oxen they had killed and basically make a paste to feed the kids. Mm-hmm. And they also boiled the bones until they were soft enough to just eat.
Mm-hmm.
Which, bones are very nutritious, all that marrow in there. But, like, could you imagine?
Yeah. And
plus, the family dogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they were... I'm glad the book didn't go too much into that because I would have been sobbing the whole time because it's too much.
Yeah.
At this point, Jacob Donner, James Smith, Sam Shoemaker, and Joseph Reinhardt had all died, mostly from exposure.
Wow.
So now we're down to about 74 people. If y'all hear my dogs in the background, I made them go be outside, so ignore that. They're barking because they want their couch back, but they're fine. So back to the forlorn snowshoe group. December 21st, snow was still falling hard. They didn't have a choice but to continue on. At one point, Mary Ann thought she saw smoke down in the gorge, and she started yelling. The men were firing shots, but nobody responded, so we don't really know what that was. Some of the parents, especially the mothers, wanted to go back for their kids, but they eventually decided they had just gone too far already.
Yeah.
And Mary Ann Graves also said that she would rather die than go back to the cabin and watch her siblings die. And because she was in her 20s, she helped raise these kids. Like,
yeah.
They started walking again, but they got lost. And sometime this afternoon on December 21st, they made a really big mistake and didn't even know it. They had reached a low ridge to their northwest, and had they just climbed over the ridge, they would have been right back onto the established immigrant trail and a nice gradual slope down into Bear Valley. Instead, they skirted left because they didn't see because the ridge was blocking their way. They skirted left at the ridge and went downhill into the canyon at the North Fork of the American River. Y'all, just go ahead and Google that for me. So they went down all in that.
That's a pretty big canyon.
Yeah, because they needed to get to the other side. But, I mean, they didn't know any better. That night, it snowed all night again. On December 22nd, they tried to leave their campsite, but they couldn't. It just was too much, and they ended up having to camp there another night. December 23rd, their 8th day of a 6-day journey, they realized that the train looked nothing like Stanton had told them to expect. And somewhere they had made a wrong turn, but they had no idea where. So, I don't know why they didn't just decide to turn around and go back up and try to figure out where they had messed up. I don't know what the mentality about that was. I thought about that later. But they just, like, continued on.
It seems to be, like, a running theme is, like, just keep moving forward, just keep moving forward, just keep moving forward.
Instead of stopping and being like, wait, let's backtrack a little bit, try to figure out, because if they had just gone back up the ridge, looked over that ridge, like, let's get to the highest point we can and just look and see where we're at, it would have saved them a lot of time and grief. But they didn't. And I don't know if it was just panic decision making or what. I have no idea. But this is where things start to get a little Patrick Dolan, they were discussing what to do. And Patrick Dolan, who is a young, vivacious man, said they should cast lots and the loser should be killed and eaten.
Wow.
No one really wanted to do this.
No.
But they tore strips anyway, and the men took turns pulling them. Could you imagine? Your husband had to pull a thing. Like Sarah just had to, like, sit there and watch.
Going to be eaten.
Killed and eaten. And even your father, like Sarah and Mary's father was there. And also there was a couple out there, the Fosters. So there were, like, loved ones at stake here. Obviously everyone was a loved one, but still, like, you had to watch that. Dolan himself pulled the fatal strip.
Wow.
But no one had the heart to kill him. Like, they just couldn't bring themselves to do it. They did not want to do that. So William Eddy pointed out that, so morbid but true, like, one of them was probably going to die soon anyway, so they might as well just decide then if they were going to eat the body or not. Like, just okay. And y'all, this is a fair warning. This is, like, if you don't want to hear about cannibalism,
why are you listening to a Donner Party episode?
Yeah, don't. If you didn't know, bow out now. Okay.
Yeah.
So they continued to walk 8 miles that day. They had not eaten anything in 48 hours. Nothing. So they continued down. And again, what I wrote, instead of turning around and getting their bearings, they continued on. So on December 24th, Christmas Eve, it started raining that day. And they managed to build a fire, but they didn't know they had built a fire over a frozen stream. So the fire burned through the ice and just fell into the water. Yeah. Lemuel Murphy and Patrick Dolan, remember, Lemuel is the 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Started to rant and rave incoherently. And that is a sign of your body.
It's shutting down.
Doing good. It is shutting down.
Yeah.
Franklin Grave was shivering constantly. Like, he could not get warm.
And that's hypothermia right there.
Mm-hmm. Antonio crawled up to the fire that night and then laid beside it. His hand fell in the fire and he didn't move it.
Wow.
He was dead.
So he just
He
crawled up and
literally
died.
crawled up to the fire and died. So they put his body to the side. Later that night, Franklin Graves stopped shivering. Damn it. He
Yeah.
knew he was dying, and this part is so sad. He called for his daughters, Sarah and Mary Ann, and they went and talked to him. And he told them they had to keep going because all of their siblings were back at the camp, and that he was going to die, and that they needed to eat his body so they could make it to save his family. And he died around 11 o'clock that night.
Wow.
And during this time, they put his body next to Antonio's. And during this time, William Eddy had remembered a little bit of like frontier lore. And what they ended up doing was they took the blankets. One person sat in the snow, and then everyone else laid on their backs with their feet up against the person sitting. So the people laying on their backs would put the blankets like over their heads and like around them, and they made like a makeshift tent because the person in the middle would hold it like
on their head
above their heads, and then their combined body heat actually
would insulate.
Would insulate, and it actually worked really well, and it probably saved a lot of their lives. But that night, Antonio and Franklin were the two to die. So now we're down to about 74. Okay, I can do this.
That was really rough. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Christmas morning, more heavy snowfall, and they couldn't go anywhere again. Dolan began to strip off his clothes.
Oh,
and
no.
crawl out into the storm.
No.
This is the hide and die syndrome.
Yeah, that's another symptom of hypothermia.
They tried to get him back into the tent, but he succumbed anyway. So down to 73. Back at the camp, Christmas Day, the mothers had hidden away some dried apples for Christmas to try to bring the kids some cheer. I know. And they boiled some oxtails and made like broth and stuff, and they tried to make it as cheery as possible. They did their best. Augustus Spitzer died that day as well. So now we're down to 72-ish. Guys, it is really hard to do the math on this. So, yeah. December 26th, they spent most of the morning just trying to get warm. They also were looking for their lost gear in the snow.
Are you talking about the
Oh, sorry. Yes,
party?
We're back in the Forlorn Party. You're right. Thank you for catching that.
You're good.
It's right in my head. But while they were looking for the gear, because I forgot to mention, while they were trying to chop down more firewood, the head of the axe went flying.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So that sucks. They all were looking for the gear, and they saw a mouse running. And they all went to go catch it. Lemuel Murphy caught it and ate it whole alive.
Oh my God.
He was one of those that was ranting and raving incoherently. Yeah. So he's losing it.
Yeah.
By that afternoon, they were back in their little makeshift tent thingy-madoodle, and Lemuel was acting a lot more erratic and began to bite people and yell, "Give me my bone."
So he's completely delirious.
Yeah. He kept trying to leave the tent. They ended up holding him down, and he died with his head in his sister's lap around 2 a.m. And they put him with the other bodies. So now we're down to 71-ish.
So this is going to be a very morbid question, but yes. Are they've left their dead? Have they tried, eating them yet, or
not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. So they've just kind of lined them up out in the snow. But no, they haven't done that yet.
Okay.
So the next day, the 27th, that night, William Eddy had poured some black gunpowder into the kindling to try to get the fire going. Unfortunately, it worked a little too well and ended up burning William Eddy and Amanda McCutcheon and Sarah Foster. Not fatally, but it would, hinder them.
Yeah.
So they divided into groups. They decided enough was enough. They ended up the next day on the where are we at? 27th? Yeah, 27th. They broke into groups, split up the bodies in a way where no one had to eat their own loved one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll spare the details, but yeah, they started the next day.
Yeah.
Louis and Salvador refused to eat the humans.
Yeah. I don't know what I would do in that situation, honestly.
I don't know either. I think maybe if it was a life or death situation, and there was consent involved, I think I might be a little open to, as of right now, it's a no. But if I could put myself in that situation.
If I've gone a week without eating.
Yeah.
And survival is on the line.
And people are depending on me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it's not just you. There's people that, like, your family is waiting for you to bring back help.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
So, the 27th, 28th, and 29th, they rested and ate and got their strength back up a little bit. Mm-hmm. By the 29th, they were ready to travel again. They didn't. This is so morbid, and I'm so sorry, guys. But it's important to talk about.
Yeah.
They didn't yield as much meat as they hoped, because it's not like you're eating 3 well-nourished people. You're eating 3 emaciated people. So literally, they got half of the meat that should have been yielded.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
They nicknamed this camp the Camp of Death.
Mm-hmm.
And they left the Camp of Death with what they estimated to be only about 4 days of rations. But they continued to travel. On December 31st, they had to go down the gorge that was super steep. They ended up using their snowshoes as kind of sleds so they could crouch down and just slide down, which saved them a lot of energy and time. But you do a lot of wipeouts when you hit stuff you don't know is in the snow. So then they ended up tumbling down half the time and ripping their clothes more. And by the end of the day, they did make it down the river. On New Year's Day, they had to climb the opposite side of the gorge. And by that time, you're mountain climbing with snowshoes on. And you're just hoping you don't fall off. By the time they made it up the side the next day, all the men were getting worse and worse. And one of the Miwoks' toes started falling off.
Oh my God.
Just at the first knuckle, just started falling off. January 2nd, they ended up being able to make better progress without their snowshoes as they got into the next valley down. And they came across the first snow-free ground that they'd seen in months on January the 3rd. January the 4th, Jay was falling behind again, and Sarah would stay back with him, so the two of them would always come up a little late every night. William Foster brought up the idea of killing the Miwoks for food. And Eddie was like, no. And then suspiciously, the Miwoks went into the woods alone that night and never came back. I think they picked up on the hints.
Yeah, I don't blame them at all.
Yep. So, also, that day, Marianne and Eddie went hunting for a deer. And they ended up coming across like a little thing of water with some fresh deer tracks in it. And they ended up finding a deer and was able to kill it. Eddie could hardly hold the gun, but he ended up being able to kill the deer. Apparently him and Marianne were so hungry that they ran up to it, slit its throat, and just started drinking its blood straight from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's desperate right there.
Yeah. Amanda, Harriet, and the Fosters began to hurry their way.
It's okay.
Damn it.
Yeah.
But Jay and Sarah had heard the shot, and Jay said, there, Eddie has killed a deer. Now, if I only can get to him, I shall live. But he didn't make it. Damn it, this is the one that gets me.
Yeah.
Because around midnight, he died. She was so sad that she tried to die herself. She just laid down.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm done.
That is really sad.
Because, like, the whole time, like, we're following Sarah's story, so, like, we get to know her, and then, like, they're newlyweds, and they're going on this great journey to start a new life, and then he doesn't make it.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, what if my husband died? And then, spiral, so.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. Like, that's a pretty easy train of thought to fall into, for sure.
Yeah. Whew, okay. Got through the worst of it for myself. Okay. All right. Sorry, guys. So,
it's okay.
We're down to 70-ish now. The next morning, the Fosters and Marianne backtracked, and they found Sarah. And, God, man, just to tell you how desperate they were, the Fosters didn't even waste any time. They were like, can we eat him?
Mm-hmm.
Just immediately. And Sarah said, you cannot hurt him. You cannot hurt him now. And just walked away. Like, can't do anything worse.
Yeah.
So she continued on to where the deer was to get food. The deer was the first food that they had eaten that wasn't human since December the 21st.
Oh my gosh.
After a few days on January 7th, they started moving again. They had scraps of clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And barely had shoes. And they ended up having to climb up another gorge. It took all day again. And this time William Foster started sizing up Marianne and Sarah and Amanda as meals. But William Eddy wasn't going to have any of it, and threatened to kill Foster if he persisted with it. Nothing came of that. It was just, I think, delirium and desperation.
Yeah.
Was just, they were having such a hard time walking at this point that, every time they came across, say, an obstacle like a log, they would basically just throw their bodies over it and roll. Yeah. I mean, they couldn't pick their legs up. Okay, so back at the camp. By January, by this time, the Reeds had eaten the last family dog.
Oh.
John Landrum had start to rant and rave. So Landrum, I guess his first name was John, but Landrum started to rant and rave. Lavina was bedbound and almost blind, and Landrum was Lavina's son. And the babies were barely hanging on. Elizabeth's children were doing okay, but they were starting to, that beef stock they had was starting to run low.
Yeah.
So, back on the forlorn group, over the next few days, they found Lewis and Salvador scavenging for nuts.
Were those the two guys that walked away?
The Miwoks that walked away, they had like found their bloody footprints and ended up following it.
Oh, wow.
Notice when they walked away, I didn't put them down as like gone.
Yeah.
That was some foreshadowing, y'all. So, long story short, Foster ended up shooting them both.
Wow.
And it was said nobody saw him do it, but at that point, it's like, murder or not, we're trying to survive. So they ended up eating them anyway. So now we're down to 68-ish. And at this point, they're back in like a kind of valley area going more gradually downhill. And they saw deer regularly. But William Eddy was too weak to even hold his gun up. He couldn't shoot them. So they came across human footprints. And then more. And then more. And they ended up literally stumbling into a native Maidu village. The villagers were horrified. Like, what? You look like zombies. I mean, so they brought them in, gave them like mashed up acorns and stuff to eat and let them rest for, I think, probably like a day or a night. They did not stay very long because as soon as they got there and rested up, it was basically either that night or like the next morning, they set out with a guide to go to Johnson's ranch. Okay. So they were like, okay, help us get to where we're going, please. Within a few miles, there was another camp where they rested, ate some more food, and
those generous people that are like, yes, we will help you. Oh my God.
Oh my God. And literally, I think the first person who saw them was like a child, and they were like screaming and crying because they looked so horrible.
I cannot imagine how they looked.
Oh my God. And
they're probably covered in blood, because of the deer, and it's just...
Yeah, awful. I mean, their clothes, like, modesty was out the window.
Yeah.
Like, you had boobs hanging out and like half your butt's hanging out and like you're just literally, your clothes are hanging on by scraps.
Yeah.
On January 17th, they all just like collapsed except for William Eddy, who continued onto the ranch with the guide. Late that afternoon, like literally from a movie scene, basically, the Maidu guide was like helping William Eddy get to the ranch. Because I'm sure the guy didn't speak English and was like, go help those people. So somebody had to relay the message. So William Eddy arrived at Johnson's ranch, and Eddy told everyone about those still out on the trail, and it took them a few days, but they were able to get everyone who was left back into Johnson's ranch alive.
That's insane.
So out of the original group, all the women survived, and 2 of the men survived.
Wow. And it was 15 people that started off, right?
Yeah, 15 or 16. So we've got Sarah Graves Fosdick, Mary Ann Graves, Amanda McCutcheon, Harriet Pike, Sarah Foster, William Foster, and William Eddy. 7. So here we are at something that feels a little better.
Okay.
It's not going to get much better, but it feels a little better. Recovery begins. So some of the people at Johnson's ranch were wintering there because they had gotten there kind of at the end, and they were like, we don't want to risk trying to make it all the way to Sutter's Fort just yet. Some of those who were wintering there had been their travel buddies before they split. So they were like, oh my God, we have to go like help our friends. Duh. Yeah. So recovery started kind of happening, but it takes time to gather materials. And also the women had to like, the women at the camp had to like help get the people who had just come off the mountains good.
Like stabilize them, yeah.
Stabilize them, feed them and stuff. And then while the men like gathered things. So let's take a step back and go back to the camp. They had nothing at all left to eat but hides. By January 21st, Landrum had died. And that we're looking at about 67. Still up until this point, all the deaths had been male.
Mm-hmm.
By February the 4th, Margaret and Eleanor Eddy, Eleanor was, I think, 3 or 5. Sorry. Eleanor was the mother, 25. Margaret was the 5-year-old daughter, had passed.
Okay.
Milt Elliott passed. I think he was in his 20s. And Harriet McCutcheon, the McCutcheon's only daughter, a 1-year-old, had died. So that leaves about 63, but also the first of the women to pass.
Mm-hmm.
February 4th, that day, was the day that the first relief went out. And William Eddy joined the freaking group to try to get back to his family. He wouldn't make it very far because he was still emaciated, but like...
Yeah.
And he didn't know yet that his wife and daughter had already passed.
Oh, no.
Now, his son was still alive at this point. So, but he's trying to get back to his family.
Of course.
On February the 18th, it took them, 14 days to get into camp. They said the people were walking cadavers. And during those 2 weeks, the Pike baby and the Keysburg baby had both died. So that's leaving around 61 now. And at this point, the bodies were just in the snow. Just laying, because they didn't have the strength to bury them.
So at the camp, there was no cannibalism at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. At this point. And this is what I didn't know about we're going to see multiple examples of cannibalism at this camp. Mm-hmm. Or in this story. I thought it was just like while they were in the woods. So they get there, take a few days to kind of group and figure out who's going to go. Now, again, it was really hard to figure out exactly who went with each group. So I did the best I could. If I missed one, very sorry. So on February 22nd, the group made up of Illequipped and Leanna Donner, George Donner, John Denton, the entire Reed family, Naomi Pike, who was 2 years old, Philippine and Ada Keysburg, William Hook, and Noah James went in this first group.
So the Donners did eventually go back into the rest of the camp.
Kind of, not really. I don't know why. They had communication between the two, but I don't think they ever officially moved to one of the cabins. But because they were still living in tents the entire time.
Okay.
But unfortunately, shortly after they left, Thomas and Patty Reed, the two youngest of the Reeds, they were 8. Well, not the youngest. James was 5. But Patty was 8. Thomas was 3. They just couldn't go anymore. They ended up having to turn around and go back to camp. And could you imagine as a mother making the choice of whether do I take the ones that can go to safety and leave the ones that can't, or do I stay with all of them? And she made the choice of taking the 2 that could go and leaving the 2 that couldn't.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Um, on this trip, we would lose John Denton, Ada Keysberg, who was only, I think, 2 or 3 at the time, and William Hook. He was 12. William Hook was interesting because he ended up dying. He made it all the way. He ended up dying because he ate too much when he got there.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. I remember when, growing up with Dad, we watched a lot of World War II shows. A lot of the concentration camp survivors ended up doing that too. They would end up just gorging themselves, and then
literally your stomach bursts open, and your body can't handle the shock of so much food at one time. Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. So that left 58-ish. I mean, William would die later, but like, for the sake of ease, let's say 58-ish. Mm-hmm. The second relief was headed by... Okay, so February 27th, the second relief is coming up as the first relief is coming down. The second relief was headed by no other than James Reed himself.
Wow.
And shit, it's going to get me again because Margaret's coming down and James is coming up, and they hadn't seen each other since October. James had no idea, like, if they were alive, and they only got to see each other for just a few minutes. And James was like, I'm going back for the other two. And then went. And it was said Margaret literally saw him and just fell on her knees. It was like, oh my, I would do the same thing.
Yeah, because I mean, like, I can't.
Okay, so by the time the second relief got there were signs that there had been cannibalism. Mm-hmm. The bodies that had been just outside were now
bones
stripped for better,
Yeah.
And this is February 27th when they set out. Like, just the thought of how long they've been out there.
They got there in October.
Yeah. So March the 2nd, by the time that the second relief finally made it into camp, March 2nd, they pushed on to Adler's Creek to find survivors. Let's see, find survivors. They gathered up as many people as they could. This time, the rest of the graves, Isaac and Mary Donner, who were children, Solomon Hook, and the entire Breen's family. So all 9 of them.
Okay.
On this trip, they would lose Elizabeth Graves, not the baby, the mother.
Okay.
Franklin Jr. and Isaac Donner on this trip. The second relief was going down. This group was going down when they were caught in a snowstorm. And what I failed to mention is that William McCutcheon was also joined by James Reed was joined by William McCutcheon. So McCutcheon got better and was coming back for his child.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
He knew Amanda was at Johnson's ranch, but he was like, I got to go get Harriet. When they got there, obviously it was heartbreaking to find out that she had already passed.
Yeah.
But so they left the weakest at the camp. They went back. They got stuck in the snowstorm. And it was really interesting to read because you don't think about when you're hiking over 30 feet of snow at this point, literally 30 feet of snow. If you build a fire, your fire starts to sink. Mm-hmm. And like it actually is kind of a win-lose situation because you end up having protection from the wind, but you're getting buried in all this snow, and they ended up having to like cut steps out to get in and out. And McCutcheon and Reed and just the few of the strongest ended up leaving the majority of the kids and the entire Breen's family at this sunken fire pit. to go get help because they were running out of food. And they were like, the third relief is going to come up soon, so they should be able to help you as well. We're going to get as many as we can down, and then we're going to tell the third relief, like, hurry.
Mm-hmm.
Days and days in the snowstorm, they had 3 dead. It was actually Mary Donner, 7-year-old Mary Donner, who suggested the cannibalism. And they gave in, and they ended up eating Elizabeth because she was the only adult that had passed.
Mm-hmm.
So we're down to 55, and what they didn't tell obviously the kids who they were eating.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they crawled out of the hole, you can kind of tell the Graves family were eating their own mother. And they didn't know it, which probably saved their lives, because I don't know if they would have eaten it had it not,
Right.
So now they're down to 55-ish. Back up in the mountains, at the camp, this is horrendous. 2 of the men that had been left behind from the search party, from the relief party, they had left some men behind to help those who were still there.
Yeah.
Decided they didn't want to be there anymore. So they abandoned their post.
What?
They left Tamzine and the Adler Creek party. Tamzine was like, please take my remaining daughters. Please take them. They were like, fine. They ended up getting paid upwards of like $500 to take these girls across the mountain. And do you know where they took them? To the other cabin, dropped them off, and then went to the mountain. Didn't even take them.
That's so sad.
And in that cabin, there was baby James Eddy and George Foster, who died soon after. While these men are in the mountains, they came across what they called starvation camp. There are lots of camps, but starvation camp is the one that they ended up getting in the deep hole.
Yeah.
Looked in there, kept walking.
What pieces of
Kept
shit.
freaking walking. So now we're down to
It's like 53.
53-ish. Yeah. After James Eddy and George Foster both passed. On March the 12th, the third relief headed out, came across the stranded people in the mountains, saw that there had been, evidence of cannibalism, but they were like, you know what? What are you going to do about that?
Right. I mean, they'd been there for like, what, a week?
Something like that, yeah. And they argued on whether or not to help them or to continue on, because William Eddy was in that group and he wanted to go find his son. And William Foster was also in the group and he wanted to go find his son. Unfortunately, they had just passed and they didn't know it yet. So they argued on whether or not to help him. They ended up, the next morning, they split up. Half the group went on to the camp. The other half helped that family, the ones that were stranded at starvation camp, down. There was a man named John Stark who led the help back down, and he said he put Jonathan Graves on his shoulder and carried him the entire way. And he even took extra kids when need be and carried more than one child to get everyone down.
Well, bless Mr. Stark. Like,
I
wish like those other fuckheads were like him.
And you know what's stupid? One of the fuckheads that abandoned got to the bottom of the hill, heard that people were going to get paid extra, like per kid they brought down, and then one of them went back up there to get more money. The audacity. I swear to God.
There's a lot of very selfish people in this story.
Tons. By the time the third relief got to the cabins, there was another storm threatening to move really quickly. So they had to go. There's time to go. So this time they took the rest of the children. Unfortunately, the 2 youngest of the Donners, Samuel and Isaac, did pass away. So we're down, and I didn't put that in the notes. So
We're about 50.
Okay, so again, these are rough numbers, guys.
Mm-hmm.
By the end, the girls made it out. The girls left. Pretty much everyone else left, except for Lavina Murphy, Lewis Keysburg, and Tamzine and George Donner. Because Tamzine was not about to leave George to die on his own because his infection was so bad.
Yeah.
Lewis Keysburg just couldn't walk because of his leg injury, and Lavina couldn't see anything. So they were like, I guess we'll see you in the spring. I mean, it is spring, but like...
Yeah. So those are the only 4 people left alive in the camp. Everyone else has gone with that third relief group.
Yep. Everyone else left. The 4th relief finally arrived on April 17th. And the 4th relief, they didn't really... It was more of like a recovery mission.
Yeah.
They didn't think they were going to find anyone alive. They did find Lewis Keysburg alive, though. And he was later charged, not convicted, of killing Tamzine.
Really?
Because apparently, like, Tamzine, he had, like, all of their money or something like that. He had, scavenged or something like that. So, I don't know. There's a lot of weird things going on. You guys can look that up for yourself. By the summer, baby Elizabeth and I believe 7-year-old Jonathan just never recovered, and they ended up passing. And on June 22nd, General Kearney and his troops arrived at the camp and were horrified by what they saw. They gathered all the remains that they could, put them in one of the cabins, and just burned it to the ground.
Yeah.
So the survivors that we have out of the entire Donner family, we have Frances, Georgia, Eliza, Aletha, Leanna, George, Mary, and then Solomon Hook, and Noah James. Noah James was one that made it out in the first. He was like the only single male that lived.
Wow.
All the others died because they didn't have the resources a pack, a group would give them.
Yeah.
The entire Reed family, except for Sarah Keyes, Margaret's mother, lived.
Wow.
Every single one of them. Out of their employees, Eliza Williams, Walter Heron, and Hiram Miller were the only ones to survive.
Did Hiram, stay with James Reed the entire time?
I think so. I think he just went, and then I kind of feel like he came back to help with some of the reliefs. So I think, he just ended up staying the whole time. The entire Breen family lived, even 1-year-old Isabella.
Wow.
And I think Isabella ended up being one of the second to longest surviving one.
Wow. Oh.
We've got, this one is so heartbreaking. William Eddy lost his entire family, his wife and his 2 children. I think he went on to get married and have a couple other kids.
Okay.
But, oh my God.
Yeah.
The McCutcheon family, William and Amanda, both survived. Their daughter did not. I believe Amanda died in childbirth a few years later.
Oh, that's so sad.
And the Murphy family, Mary, William, Simon, those are the younger kids. The 3 of those younger kids survived. Sarah and William Foster both survived. Their son did not. I believe they ended up having more children. And then Harriet Pike, her husband, William, was the one that got shot in the back on accident.
Yeah.
Her 3-year-old daughter, Naomi, survived. The 1-year-old daughter did not, but...
and Harriet Pike died as well, right?
No, she survived.
Oh,
she was
survived?
part of the Forlorn group.
Okay.
Yep, she survived. She would go on and get married and have some more kids as well.
Okay.
The Keysburg family... Only Lewis and Philippine survived. I only saw stuff about Lewis. he ended up, I know for sure, having more kids, but I don't know exactly what happened with Philippine. Out of the Wolfinger family, only Doris survived, but she did survive. Jean-Baptiste Trudeau survived.
Wow.
And 18-year-old, and he apparently stayed with the Donner daughters for a while and would visit them frequently throughout the years.
Aww.
And of the Graves family, Sarah, Mary, William, Eleanor, Lavina, and Nancy survived.
So what was the final?
46 survivors out of like 87.
Wow, that's so tragic. I mean, I'm glad the survivors did survive, but losing almost half of the people over a year, almost an entire year. That's so sad.
All because they trusted the wrong people. They didn't listen to the people that were warning them not to do what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And ego, thinking that they could make it through. And they couldn't.
Wow.
So there we are. That's
So I guess just like once like the survivors were rescued and they made it out, they just went off and started living their own lives.
They started living their own lives. Some of them actually went back home. They were like, fuck California.
Yeah.
One of the Graves, I think Billy Graves, was like, I'm going back to Illinois. And literally just the next year went back to Illinois.
Yeah. Oh.
But, I mean, and then some of them just, like, I think Sarah, the book said Sarah ended up getting married, but then having a few kids. A couple years later, her husband was hung for, like, stealing horses, and then she got married again and had some more kids, and then that one, she had it rough.
I'm looking through the pictures of the link, and it looks like there's a lot of memorials.
There are. I think we should
in the
go.
area. Oh man, that'll be a very, very somber visit.
Yeah, but I want to go because I mean, there's like the rock that they.
Yeah, the Mervyn Cafe. So I guess that lists like all the names of the people who passed away.
Oh,
there's a memorial statue. Do you know who the statue is of?
I don't know. It looks like
there's just an inscription on it. I don't think it says.
It'd be hard to make a statue for 80 people.
Yeah. I wonder if it's like the Donner, like George, and I can't remember his wife's name.
Tamzine,
thank you. Wow.
Yeah, this is
rough.
Just dire. It's just
so sad.
God, and there's so many more heartbreaking things that I just didn't include because we're already,
it's almost a 4-hour journey.
Yeah.
so, but you did a really good job of like summarizing all the events because the ones that you covered I felt like were very important to the story.
Yeah. I picked the biggest ones for sure.
Yeah. It didn't feel like there was a lot of extraneous information. Thank you for your sacrifice.
You're welcome. Hopefully I will sleep better tonight. I might drink some wine.
Yeah. I do not blame you there at all.
Beth, what have you done to me? It is interesting that, think about it, 3 different instances of cannibalism, and none of them had prior knowledge of that happening with anyone else.
Right. They all, like, independently
came to that conclusion.
Yeah.
There was, at the end, there was a lot of talk about Keysburg being kind of villainous. And I don't know. It was like, I don't even know if I want to talk about it on the pod, but like it was really rough. Like almost like as soon as like these babies were dying, he would just, whoop, time to
munch on them.
Eat them. Yep. And it was horrible, but I guess at the same time, I don't know if he was like killing them or what, but he just seemed very distant at that point. Because, I mean, he didn't get out of those mountains until April.
Yeah.
April. And he had lost both of his children, one of them he did watch die. And I think at one point, while he was being evacuated, he saw some fabric sticking out of the snow, and he dug around and he pulled up his own daughter out of the snow. I can't imagine.
No,
Just being like, oh, what's that? And pull the body of your 3-year-old up out of the snow.
Something probably snapped within him.
Yeah. And that was after he did all that stuff. But at that point, it's like, because he didn't know that she hadn't made it.
Oh.
Because he had been stuck in the mountains. And his wife was... Yeah. Awful. This whole thing is just
It's
one
so
bad
sad.
decision after another. They had so many chances to avert course, and they
just didn't. Yeah. It's so sad. I don't think, like, there's words to describe how horrible this whole situation is. I think they need to invent new words.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for covering this.
You're welcome. Beth, I've got some words for you. I don't know yet what they are, but I have words for you. I still love you, though.
Yes. Right, well, do you want to get into our socials?
Yeah, let's do socials.
Okay.
And let these good people cry alone.
Yeah.
So, if we haven't scared you off yet, you can find us on Facebook.
Ill-Equipped History podcast group and page.
Instagram.
At Ill-Equipped History.
Gmail. I keep forgetting them all.
Ill-Equippedhistory at gmail.com.
TikTok.
At Ill-Equipped History.
And Patreon.
Patreon.com/Ill-Equippedhistory. Please sign up for our bonus episodes.
Yeah, it's still not too late to get a sticker.
It's not. Sign up in the month of October and you get a free little sticker from us.
Yeah, limited edition.
It's almost the end of October, so you gotta sign up.
Do it. Okay, well, I guess if you're really that worried about the mules, don't be. Just go.
Yeah. Oh, those poor mules.
Yeah, all the mules and all the cattle that they were like so worried about saving just ran off and died anyway.
Oh, so sad.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. I don't really have anything to add.
I don't think there is anything to add.
Okay, bye.